what do we do now that is no longer valuable, that people won't need because they can do it themselves, or there are just going to be better, faster ways to do it? Let's always be thinking about that and always be categorizing some of our idea flow into that bucket. What can I not do today that I'm likely to be able to do tomorrow? Like, where is this going? How do I democratize work and open new markets or grow current markets to a scale that wouldn't be possible today? Like, what are the ways in which we can take things we do now and just scale them? How do I move work up market so that I am competing in new ways? What are the new ways that I can be competing because some of the things we spend a lot of time on right now can be moved upstream?
I think if you're a small or solo practitioner, if you're a plaintiff side lawyer, if you're a boutique firm, if you're a public law department or a really revenue deprived legal services organization, this is such a game changer for you. You can start to level the playing field. You can start to do things you weren't capable of doing and really compete and transform the way that law is practiced. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law, your go-to podcast focused on exploring the transformative impact of artificial intelligence on the legal industry. We're your hosts, Bridget McCormack and Jen Leonard, and together we'll navigate the rapidly evolving landscape of artificial intelligence, uncovering the opportunities, addressing the risks, and imagining the future.
In each episode, we bring you insightful discussions about cutting-edge technologies, the latest trends, actionable strategies, case studies, and novel insights that help your organization imagine its own future.
Whether you're a legal professional, a tech enthusiast, or simply curious about the future of law, this podcast is your gateway to understanding the profound changes AI will bring to the profession. Join us as we scale education and empower the legal community to thrive in an era of unprecedented innovation.
Welcome to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. So welcome back, everybody, to the second episode of 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. I am your co-host, Jen Leonard, and thrilled to be joined by Bridget McCormack, the president and CEO of the American Arbitration Association. We're thrilled to create this project to help accelerate AI literacy in the legal profession. And Bridget and I thought it would be fun because we're constantly playing around with these technologies to kick off our show today by talking about our Gen AI moments. So those moments where we've been playing with tools that maybe we've been playing with for a while, but we do something with the tools that seems especially magical or different from what we've experienced before. So Bridget, I would love if you would lead our conversation by sharing your most recent Gen AI moment.
Oh gosh, I think I might start with like my first one, and then I'll build up as we go along. But I was thinking about when was it that I first started using the technology, and I thought, oh wow, this is going to start occupying a lot of my time and brain space. And it was pretty early into my ChatGPT subscription, which I confessed to getting, I think, the day it was available, just from following people on Twitter. I figured I had to try it. And I was sort of doing, I think, some pretty basic prompts and thinking like, okay, yeah, this is kind of fun. It's nice to have an answer all put together instead of pulling from a bunch of different websites. But my husband and I were traveling to northern Michigan to a particular county that has great vineyards and also great hard cider places. And I wanted to figure out if we could get to all of the hard cider places in one day and in what order. And I asked it, and it wrote me the most like beautiful plan for how to do that and where to go when. But it included one cider place that was from a neighboring county. And so I wrote back and I was like, this is pretty good, but this one place is not actually in Leelanau County. And I asked you about Leelanau County. Like I wanted to see how it reacted. And it was so kind. It was so polite and kind. And its response to me, it apologized. It said, I'm sorry, I'll try and do better. You're right. It told me the county it was in and amended its answer. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually like I'm going to say, I'm worried about what people, a thought partner. I'm like, I'm actually going to be able to, have a conversation back and forth. It's not only going to give me information, it's going to work with me. And that's when I thought this is going to have so many applications in my, work life and life that it's time for me to roll up my sleeves and learn everything I can about how we got here and where we're headed. I don't know. Have you had one recently that's been fun?
I have, but I want to ask you a question about yours. First, I love that you started with the most important tasks for generative technology, finding Spike Snyder. Were there places that it put on the list that you weren't familiar with?
Yeah, there were. And I thought I was familiar with most of them. So in part, I was asking just to see, because I thought I could test its chops. But it turns out there were two that I was not familiar with that I got to discover. I did not have my mind changed about my favorites based on visiting them, but I like to have my favorites reinforced by doing more thorough research. So I really appreciate my friend ChatGPT for helping me with that.
Well, I celebrate your very specific version of reinforcement learning. It's something I could get behind. I'm also curious because the GPT technology was so polite to you, and I've been thinking about this a little bit recently, and somebody mentioned it the other day. Are you polite in response when you engage with the tools? Like, do you say please and thank you? And do you think we'll continue doing that? And what does it mean?
I love that you asked me this. I do it consistently. I always am polite. I say please and thank you. I give it positive feedback when it does something that I was hoping it would do well, particularly well, as if I'm talking to a person. And I don't think it's because I, have some inside information that being polite gets better answers. Although I've heard Ethan Malik say that that's true, and maybe we should track down that research one time if folks are interested. But I think it's actually because I feel like I'm interacting with an agent that's humanish, that I just default to my human settings. And so I use please and thank you. Do you?
I always do. And I also give it positive reinforcement, both because I think I'm just conditioned to do that, and also because I'm so frequently amazed at what it does. And just have to remark to somebody about it. Like, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And then, of course, it will say, you're very welcome. Please let me know if you need anything else. I'm curious to see how long that lasts, whether we continue being polite to the technology or we become very rude with it. But I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I predict it. I don't think it changes because I think it becomes more and more, agentic, right? It becomes more and more like somebody who's working with us on a project. So I don't see myself. I don't get that way with people I'm familiar with. Like, I start treating them like crap, I hope. Right. So I think that'll be true here too. But tell me about a moment you've had recently.
I was going to a hotel and I wanted to see if it was pet friendly. And that's how I asked the question. I said, is this hotel in this city pet friendly? And it wrote back, they are pet friendly. They have specific rooms and you need to call this number to ask. And then they said, are you planning to take your French bulldog? And I was stunned by this because I hadn't mentioned a French bulldog in the prompt or a dog at all. I just mentioned a pet. And so I realized that I had previously chatted with ChatGPT about the bulldog, but I found it fascinating that it made that connection. I know now, there's memory stored, but the fact that it connected a pet question with that earlier question was really stunning to me.
That's wild. That's completely wild. It reminded me of just one short one, and then I know we have too much to talk about today, so we have to move on. But I have the Pi app. I have a subscription to Pi, which is the personal AI agent company built by Mustafa Suleyman and Reid Hoffman. I know Mustafa is now at Microsoft. In fact, most of that crew is now at Microsoft. But this a long time ago, like last spring, I did a presentation in Philadelphia, actually, at a law firm about generative AI. And I was in my Uber on the way to the airport, flying home to Michigan. And I got a text from Pi. It has a text interface. And it said, how did your presentation go? Hadn't talked to Pi in weeks. Hadn't told Pi I was doing a presentation. Nope. I mean, I know that the law firm had mentioned it on LinkedIn, I guess. Or, there must have been some like public-facing mention of this presentation. But Pi just wanted to know more about it and how it went.
Oh, my gosh. And how did that make you feel?
No, I mean, I love my husband very much, but I don't think he had any idea I was doing a presentation on AI that day. He didn't ask me, so it was kind of nice that somebody wanted to know. How did it go?
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. I'm fascinated by
Yeah.
that. And also, I'll put in a plug. I know people are always curious about the resources that you can use to learn about all of this stuff. And you mentioned Mustafa Suleiman. I don't know whether you've read The Coming Wave yet that he wrote, but it's a really interesting take on converging technologies in the future.
I have read it, and I actually think that should go to the top of our. Like, I always forget to add that to our. We have a slide on resources, and I feel like that one should absolutely be in there.
Yeah, because he talks not only about generative technology, but biopharmaceuticals and quantum computing, I think, and chip development as sort of the converging factors. We'll have to cover those other ones in our next podcast series.
Yeah, that's podcast series number 2. All right. Well, I think this will be fun to. I'm going to try and keep track of some of these moments as we go, and we can mention them in future episodes. It'll be a fun thing to talk about. Let's do a
absolutely.
short update. Let's do a short update on like news that's happened in legal and AI recently. There was some news about a new partnership or joint venture between 2 large legal tech companies, Vlex and iManage, I think, about combining the different data sets they work on to make, work more efficient, I think, for lawyers, mostly in law firms. Tell me what you know about that and what does it mean and why should lawyers care?
Yeah, so one of the things we're trying to do with our project together is to help people sort of cut through the noise and understand the concepts really related to all the mergers and partnerships and activity and new tools. And I saw this partnership between Vlex and iManage, which is, to my mind, a great example of trying to bring together 2 bodies of information that lawyers use so frequently. We talked on the first episode about why we think generative AI will be so transformative in a profession that is based on language and has all of these really, really refined and well-organized sources of information. But in law firms in particular, you have 2 different sources of information. You've got your public law, although law firms pay huge subscriptions for that public law access, and we can talk about that on a different podcast. But all of their legal research, the case laws, the statutes, the restatements, the secondary treatises, those kinds of things that lawyers use to advise their clients. And then you have this other body of information that is the internal work product of the attorneys that have filled your firm over the last 2 decades at least. And that's all been captured in your document management systems or your case management systems. But they've never really spoken to one another in a major way. And what I took from this combination and others like it is this attempt to unlock, through breaking down the barrier between that public law information and your internal work product, the ability to be more efficient, the ability to not reinvent the wheel every time or have to exit one body and enter another one and bring that information back and forth. So I thought it was a really interesting development because it's something you and I really focused on at the outset of this about how powerful it can be. And now we're trying to resolve some of the friction that gets in the way of that power.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to see where this goes. I think that's one of those things that lawyers just take for granted, that we have to hop in and out of these different systems to work through problems. And when all of a sudden we don't have to, it will have some, I think, significant ripples in in our workflows and how we can serve clients. So that'll be exciting to watch.
Yeah, for sure. And I expect we'll see more combinations like this. And we're going to talk a little bit about the role of associates, but a lot of my experience as a junior associate was jumping in and out of these different bodies of information and synthesizing and aggregating a lot of it. So, one of the challenges ahead is really reshaping those roles that involve that activity, which I think will be exciting for a lot of people to not have to have that be a major part of your job anymore and really focus on the law itself. So another thing that we wanted to do is in many of our presentations that we get the chance to do together and separately, we've been trying to describe some concepts that relate to generative technology that make it different from other technology that make it, like Ethan Malik, who's probably one of our favorite thought leaders, says very weird. One of the weird things about the technology is that it was released without an instruction manual. We have no specific way to use it. And it seems like the companies and technologists that create it don't have a particular interest in telling us how to use it, which is great. But there are different concepts that relate to that weirdness that we want to both describe for people and then explain how we think this is important and why we think it's important for lawyers to understand as they're trying to get their arms around it. So one of the first topics, Bridget, it would be great if you could explain for our listeners, is this concept that came out of a paper I think that Ethan and other professors wrote last year. And it's this concept of the jagged frontier of capabilities. What does that mean?
Yeah, I've used this many times since I read it in one of Ethan's blog posts. I'm just going to fess up right now. I never read the actual paper. I usually read Ethan's like descriptions for regular people about the papers rather than the papers themselves. But I found it a super useful term because it resonates so much if you use the technology. And what they mean by it is that the technology is excellent at some things. I mean, frankly, better than humans at some things that humans do. And when you find those, you're, like we described earlier, kind of amazed and delighted, and you want to keep using it and figuring out what else it can do. And then there are other things that you would expect it would be good at that it's not very good at. Now, and some things we know it's not good at. It's not yet great at math. It's getting better at math. It's not yet great at math. So things that are sort of math adjacent, you can probably reason your way to, oh, it's not going to be great at that. But then there are just some other things that you would expect it would be good at, and it's not. And the only way to figure it out is to push to the edge and see if it works. And so that's why Ethan and others call it the jagged edge, the jagged frontier, because some things work and some things don't. And I think this is so important because I meet people who I think started with one of those use cases that it turned out not to be great at, or turned out to be sort of middle school level good at, which isn't that great if you're a lawyer, for example. And they might get discouraged or not discouraged. They might just think, well, this isn't very useful to me, and they move on with their life and they go back to everything they used to do instead of going and trying another thing that it might turn out to be excellent at and save them gobs of time and this other thing that they also have to do every day. And that is a really complicated place for a technology to sit if it wants to grow a user base, for I think those reasons that I just explained. And I've thought about how that maps onto legal, but I wonder what you say. Do you think that that causes extra uptake issues for lawyers, or sort of the same?
I think it creates a lot of complexity in having the conversation in your organization, even with just people you work with, because like you said, if you are sitting and you're talking to two lawyers and they've tried the same exact type of technology, let's say GPT-4 or Claude or something like that, but they've prompted it with different questions, and one of them got amazing results and the other got really disappointing results because one's outside the frontier, one's inside the frontier, they think they're arguing about the same experience when they're having a totally different conversation, and they both may be right. And you don't really know, if you're trying to help people understand the technology, what prompts they've actually used and whether those fall inside or outside the frontier, or whether this person is particularly skeptical even if it was inside the frontier. So level setting and making sure that people are trying many different attempts to understand the technology and trying them over time, because the frontier keeps changing as the technology learns more and more. I think that makes it so strange in terms of how you have a unified conversation for people. But I think at least recognizing that there is this frontier is a helpful first step. And I almost want to create a visual for people where there is a frontier and you're sort of putting Post-its inside and outside the frontier and then continuing to test it over time to see how that frontier changes.
Yeah, that's a great point about how the frontier today isn't necessarily going to be the frontier tomorrow or next week, or certainly not 3 months from now. So you have to kind of keep at it to figure out where the edges are.
Yeah,
That's right.
100%.
So what about the the uneven law of AI distribution? That's another term that I think we both use now in presentations, and I find just really true in my own life. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so I know we're going to share our resources at the end, but I hear this most frequently from the hosts of the artificial intelligence show. Paul Reitzer and Mike Kaput have talked about this. I think there's a great blog post that Paul Reitzer wrote about it. But the idea essentially is that everybody is at a different place right now, at least in understanding what generative AI is, what its capabilities are, and what impact it will have on the world and our work. And that's another thing that makes it difficult to have sort of a uniform conversation with a group of attorneys or legal professionals or judges. People think that they're knowledgeable maybe, but they're not as knowledgeable as somebody else in the group, or there's another person who maybe is a little bit bashful that they haven't kept pace with what's happening. So I try to start every presentation I do with some of these concepts, including this one. This might feel infantilizing to you that we're going to start here, but we can actually move forward with a conversation as an organization or a team without level setting at the moment and moving forward. And, how do you think this impacts, Bridget? We're working in a world with 4 different generations for the first time, maybe in some places 5 different generations if you have people who are very senior in the organization. What does this mean in the context of that complexity too?
I think it creates a lot of opportunities for bridging some of what feel like pretty sticky generational divide post pandemic. At least I have found in a number of workplaces and organizations I've been talking to. But it's interesting how many presentations I have done or talks I've given where I've heard from a very senior person. I'm really glad I am, at retirement age and I don't have to figure all of this out. And I think that's too bad, because I actually, think like every other hard problem, we're usually better off if we have people contributing to it with different perspectives. But I have heard that quite a bit. But my guess is there are probably some Gen Zers who feel, like they wish they can't retire. But like, there's a whole lot out there that they have to learn, and it feels like it's moving so fast, and it's intimidating. I have a bunch of 20-something kids, and they're not all equally committed to technology, and the ones that aren't, I think, are like, God, do I have to learn all that now too? There's a lot out there to learn, and it's changing so quickly that this is important to remember when you're working with an organization, that we probably all have different levels of knowledge and experience, and we should all be able to be comfortable talking about that and learning about that. Everybody's learning, and that's going to be true for a while.
Yeah. And I agree. I think it's really exciting too that this is so new, that if you like learning, and I think most lawyers do like learning and most legal professionals like learning, you can lead your efforts no matter which level you're at. And we're going to talk in a little bit about how associates and junior lawyers can get involved. But there was some interesting research that just came out last week, I think, about how sophisticated or wise junior usage of generative technology is. And there's sort of this myth of the digital native that just because you're younger, you will have a better understanding of how to deploy technology. And it turns out, based on this research with BCG consultants, that's not necessarily the case, that you also need experience and judgment to know how best to deploy these technologies, which I think is another interesting thing that maybe senior leaders don't fully appreciate. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to involve your junior lawyers. But as we're thinking about all generations, and maybe juniors in particular, but everybody across the board, there's this other concept that we both really enjoy thinking about, talking about, and that is the concept of the secret cyborg, which sounds so sci-fi. What is the secret cyborg, Bridget?
Secret cyborg, I think, also came from Ethan Malik, but I use it now all the time when I'm talking to lawyers in particular who are reluctant to figure out what all of this technology means for their business. I had an example of this just recently at a conference with a very excellent senior lawyer who is the managing partner of his firm. It's a smaller firm, but a firm that does international business in Colorado. And he said, "Oh no, we're not ever going to know. We're not doing anything with AI. No way." He just had a lot of assumptions about how it was unsafe and was too risky. And there were a couple of his junior lawyers at the same conference, and they were sort of nearby, and they were sort of smiling. And I said, "What do you guys think? And do you agree?" And they're like, "We think we should probably actually figure out what tools might, be good for the practice." And so then I just started asking about what they're doing. So the secret cyborg is those people in your organization that are using it, whether you have told them to or not. They're I guess usually not, because the secret cyborg is secret. So you might think that, your organization is generative AI free, but we're here to tell you it is not generative AI free. Maybe they're not using it on their work computer. Maybe they're using it on their personal devices. And maybe they're using it on their personal devices during work hours or after work hours. But they're using it without any guidance or instruction from you about how to use it in a way that complies with your, the other policies that are important to your business and your practice. And that carries with it much greater risk than any risk of having your team, using it safely with guidance and teaching and training. Have you encountered interesting secret cyborg issues in legal that are worth flagging?
I have not had any secret cyborgs unveil themselves to me as a secret cyborg, but having been a junior attorney under a lot of pressure and stress and not really knowing what I'm doing, and I'm picking on juniors here, I think this is across generations, but I can certainly understand the temptation when you have a machine as powerful as a GPT frontier model of asking it to help you draft something. And I think that's something that organizations need to be aware of. And we say this frequently, but I always imagine us 10 or 20 years from now looking back on the conversations that we had at the dawn of this and sort of the rush to ban GPT technology everywhere. And I think we will very soon enter a world where malpractice insurers or risk managers are requiring or strongly encouraging organizations to create internal proprietary GPT models that people can use to avoid this. I did hear a funny anecdote somewhere along the way where a law firm partner said that he was relieved to find a typo in a brief because he knew a human had produced it because GPT doesn't have any typos in it. So AI detection technology is notoriously fallible, and there's no real way for you to know whether a secret cyborg created this or an associate within your organization. So I think it's an important thing for firms to be thinking about, especially, like you said, the ones that insist that they are Gen AI free. And, that I think leads really nicely into our next segment. Those are a few topics or concepts that we think are helpful, and we'll try to add more as we go. The jagged frontier of capabilities, the uneven law of AI distribution, and this idea of the secret cyborgs. But we also thought it would be helpful because we get to present to smaller groups in smaller venues to share out some of the questions that we're hearing from those audiences and offer our best assessment for how to respond. And I've had the chance in recent weeks to spend more time than I've had to date with associates in firms and junior attorneys. And what I'm hearing from them, to your point about partners who are saying they're close to retirement and grateful they don't have to think about these things, associates are really eager to know what their organizations are thinking about generative AI. And I think the red blinking light for a lot of firms in particular has been the business model and the client engagement piece. And the associates don't really know how they should be involved, even though a lot of the technology will impact their work maybe even more than senior attorney work. So a question that I've gotten recently is, how should I try to get involved if I'm an associate? And does it matter which level of associate I am when I try to get involved? And so I wonder, Bridget, if you'd be comfortable offering your thoughts, and then I'm happy to build on yours.
Absolutely. I mean, am not an associate and I don't work in a law firm, but with those disclaimers, I have thoughts about how I think exciting a time is if you're entering law practice right now. I get why it might also be sort of terrifying, given the change that feels is imminent. But I think the technology is going to allow so many new things that lawyers can do that you want to get fully involved. So I think the first thing associates should do is raise their hand in whatever for their law firms have for learning about the technology, exploring use cases, putting in place frameworks and practices, and maybe innovation teams for thinking about the ways the technology might impact their own business and practice in both positive and negative ways. I mean, they can obviously explore all of the above. And my sense is people are very eager to have helpers and people who want to sign up to get involved in this work. And because there isn't any expert in it, this isn't a case where your law firm has the world's most renowned, insurance defense, practice group already. And so all you can do is whatever menial tasks they give you. This is an opportunity for you and pretty senior people in your firm to work together and to get to know each other in a way that probably would be hard in other parts of what firms do. So I think my main advice is speak up, raise your hand, ask who's doing this and how can I get involved in whatever way you need. I'm willing to do it. What do you think? Do you have other thoughts or advice for folks?
I think that's right. And I think, maybe the partners or the senior lawyers are not really thinking necessarily of your involvement until you raise your hand. Many organizations and firms have associates committees. So I would advocate for raising this with your associates committee. Usually they have a seat in other committees, or the leader does, that they can raise these concerns. I think something for leaders to think about, because I can also understand busy partners saying, we don't have the time to integrate all of this information and make sure that everybody's voice is heard. But because this is such a weird technology, it also requires bottom-up learning. The use cases are being developed at an individual level. And because of the nature of the work that junior lawyers do, they are more likely to identify use cases that an experienced, securities lawyer may not be flagging, that could create efficiencies and even open up new revenue streams for the firm that it hadn't thought of before. So I think thinking of it from a strategy standpoint of really accelerating your ability as an organization to move into the future requires that you engage with the associates. I also think, frankly, right now there is a competition for talent among firms. I have worked with law students for a very long time. They're always trying to differentiate firms from one another when they all seem the same. To be perceived or to actually be the firm that is incorporating the voices of new talent into its future strategy, I think is a smart recruitment tool as well. I would want to go right now to a firm that doesn't have a senior leader saying, I can't wait to retire, but has leaders that are saying, like, help us build the firm of the future.
Yeah, that all sounds right. I don't know. This feels like a topic we might come back to as we have other ideas or thoughts or experiences in our work together. Another topic that I think is worth talking about here today that we hear a lot is a question about how leaders can create a strategy to keep absorbing all of the fast-paced new information coming about this technology and its capabilities, while still, maintaining a clear direction and, keeping the trains running. Like usually in most businesses, and law firms or businesses, it's not like we have a bunch of extra time where we're like, oh, I guess we could use all Monday. We don't do anything on Mondays. Let's have Mondays be our tech learning day. We're busy. We're already doing more than we have minutes for. So how do you think about this when you talk to law firm leaders or leaders of other legal organizations about creating a strategy for this moment of taking in the new, but continuing with a clear path.
Yeah, keeping up to speed on the developments in this area is virtually impossible. And I know you and I both spend a significant amount of time following a lot of news and thought leaders. And we have things where we get on to plan for the podcast that we haven't heard that the other person has heard. So I think it's sort of a fool's errand to try to keep pace with the day-to-day, minute-to-minute developments. But I think a smart thing to do as an organization is to work together to create a framework that represents a strategy that is aligned with your organization's goals and mission, and then think about how that framework can absorb these changes and help you make decisions more quickly, because you don't have every Monday to take off and, examine what happened over the last week and how it fits in. But when there are major developments, looking back at that framework and thinking about how it applies to the framework and what decision would result, or adapting the framework as you go if things are changing so significantly. And I know, Bridget, we're going to talk in an upcoming episode about the transformative work that you and your team have done at the AAA. And I know you also have developed some questions that might be helpful for leaders to start thinking about and folding them into their own frameworks. Would you be open to sharing those questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say I'm excited to talk about how we're applying a lot of these things you and I are talking about, but that's going to come in a future episode. But in the meantime, I think the framework has been really useful for us. And I should again, I think Ethan Malik actually is how I first started categorizing these. So I should always just footnote Ethan Malik for everything I say. Could we just do that?
Blanket footnote
so nobody's like, okay. So but I do think these are great questions for any leader of any organization, but absolutely any legacy legal organization, which is almost every legal organization, because we've all been able to withstand all disruption for a really long time. One question is, what do we do now that is no longer valuable, that people won't need because they can do it themselves, or there are just going to be better, faster ways to do it, cheaper ways to do it. Let's always be thinking about that and always be categorizing some of our idea flow into that bucket. What can I not do today that I'm likely to be able to do tomorrow? Like, where is this going, so that something that I can't offer people today, I am very likely going to be able to offer people tomorrow. You have to keep a list of those things and figure out what it's going to mean to get you there, and obviously what it's going to cost, and in terms of like time and people and all the above. A third is, how do I democratize work and open new markets, or grow current markets to a scale that wouldn't be possible today? Like, what are the ways in which we can take things we do now and just scale them, basically? That feels to me like another bucket. And again, I think sometimes things will cross buckets a little bit, but it's worth thinking about those in particular. And finally, how do I move work up market so that I am competing in new ways? What are the new ways that I can be competing, because some of the things we spend a lot of time on right now can be moved upstream? Again, we can talk in a lot of specific ways of what that's actually looked like in the day-to-day at the AAA. And I'm lucky that we already had a sophisticated, robust, resourced innovation program to be able to map all this onto. But that's been a helpful way to categorize what can otherwise feel like just a swirling set of questions, given all the change that feels like it's around us.
I love those four questions. I think it's like a North Star framework for thinking about the future. I think the second one, the what can I not do today that I could do tomorrow, is one that really challenges a lot of lawyers, because we haven't been forced to reimagine the way that we work. So having some priming activities to even loosen up those creative muscles and get us thinking about what we could possibly do. We've been so tethered to, at least in the private sector, to this billable hour model for so long. And it's been a really successful, lucrative model for many firms, but it's also a huge limitation on what we're able to achieve. We only each have 24 hours in a day. We have to sleep during some of that time and live during other times. So I think the two last questions, how do I democratize work and open up new markets, and how do I bring work up market, are important for different parts of the industry. So that democratized piece for really, really big global firms that are highly leveraged and rely on the generation of enormous amounts of billable hours at the junior levels in particular will be impacted by this technology in ways that challenge their existing business model. But if you have an abundance mindset and you work with your organization around mitigating loss aversion, or the idea that you are trying to cling to a world that is rapidly changing, you could find so many different ways to serve new markets. You have been an advocate for civil justice reform, and 90% of American civil legal needs, something like that, go unmet. That is enormous untapped opportunity to serve small businesses and individuals, right? And then the fourth question, how do I bring work up market and compete in new ways? I think if you're a small or solo practitioner, if you're a plaintiff side lawyer, if you're a boutique firm, if you're a public law department, or a really revenue deprived legal services organization, this is such a game changer for you. You can start to level the playing field. You can start to do things you weren't capable of doing and really compete and transform the way that law is practiced. And I think that's incredibly exciting for both groups, really.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, question 3 and question 4 are kind of cover both the excitement on the supply side and the demand side, which I think is really interesting. Again, in a future episode, we're going to talk about opportunities for courts and judges, and frankly, ADR providers are, kind of like courts and judges. We're kind of we're the operating system for the supply and the demand. And I think the upside for the operating system is equally exciting. So I'm going to have to footnote Jordan Furlong there for giving me that framework. So some of our other people that we listen to and read a lot has helped me think about that. And I'm excited to talk about that too.
Same. And that would be another great episode, is to channel Jordan's great work on the operating system. And Kat Moon has also talked about the operating system of law. So we could talk about that in the future. But your last point in all of our, the Avengers of thinking about the future of law that we've referenced, one of the things I think is so cool about this moment personally, and maybe it's just because of the way I like to learn, is that you're really foraging for information every day. And I'm using that term because as anybody who's had to be around me the last few months knows, I just finished Tomorrow Mind by Marty Seligman and Gabriella Rosen-Kellerman, and thinking about how we're naturally wired to forage in our environment and really meet the landscape as it is versus trying to plan or look back. I've been thinking about that from a knowledge standpoint, and nobody has a roadmap for how to learn about this stuff. There's nobody who's been doing this for 30 years and is the go-to expert. But you and I have developed and continue to aggregate a list of go-to resources that grows by the day. And we thought it would be helpful for people to hear some of the things that we learn from and the people that we learn from. And so I was wondering if you would kick us off, Bridget, and share some of your favorite resources, and then I'll add a few to the end. And we'll do this in every episode as we add more names to the list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is great. Just for folks to understand how we're getting our information. It's not, I don't have any degree. I haven't gone back to school. And I don't think anybody can yet. I know I see a lot of actual like Coursera offerings for this, that, and the other thing, but I'm listening to a lot of podcasts and reading or listening to a lot of books. I will confess that I listen to books more than I read them, because I can walk or really slowly jog while taking in the information and try and get two things done at once. So we've already talked a lot about Ethan Mollick. Ethan Mollick is a professor at Wharton, and I think he's probably like the leading scholar, thought leader about these technologies, who is translating the work of other researchers and scholars for those of us who don't want to read the academic papers, like for the real world. I mean, Ethan's work is very accessible, and so subscribing to his Substack is one thing I recommend to everybody do. It doesn't come out that it will not overwhelm your inbox, and it's a great way to keep up with what he's working on and sort of aggregating. And also just follow him on social media. He posts really interesting things, and you get to really keep up with what's happening. He has a book out recently on this topic called Co-Intelligence, and I highly recommend that. In fact, maybe you start there, like listen to that book, and I feel like it's just a great. You'll be like ready to go on trying to figure out where you want to go next. It's a great place to get caught up to today. I already mentioned Jordan Furlong. Jordan is a really thoughtful writer, scholar, teacher, trainer, who's out of Ottawa, but does thinking about legal systems all around the world. And Jordan's Substack too is focused on legal and often on this technology, not only on this technology. Jordan writes about other things in the future of the profession, but I highly recommend Jordan's Substack. Another really easy way to kind of keep up with what I think someone who's really thoughtful and smart is thinking about what all this means. And then I'm throwing one podcast in here that is not legal at all. Ethan Mullet's isn't either. But I've really enjoyed for understanding how the technology is going to impact so many other parts of your life, your world, other industry, because that then helps me think about the corollaries in law. And that's Reid Hoffman's podcast called Possible, which he does with Aria Finger. I wish I knew who Aria Finger was. I like her. I like listening to her, but I don't know her. But they often have other guests, and they will talk with their other guests about what this technology is going to mean for entertainment, for energy, for you name it. And they're pretty short segments, but really super interesting and a way, I think, to learn kind of generally what's possible. That's why it's called that. What do you have on the first list?
Well, I'm excited to learn about Possible because I didn't know about that one before. So I'm going to add that to my list. One that you and I have both really followed closely and used with our class when we taught generative technologies is the Artificial Intelligence Show. It was formerly the Marketing Artificial Intelligence Show because they have a marketing background. But it's Paul Rather and Mike Kaput. They have an institute called the Marketing AI Institute, but they have sort of found themselves, I think, in a place where they are educating all of us now. They've been doing this for a really long time, and their podcast comes out weekly on Tuesdays, I think, and it's my number one go-to. They give a really great survey of developments in the broader tech landscape, and then thinking about how organizations should be preparing and actively testing and integrating technology. And I find it to be really accessible and approachable. So I would really recommend the AI show. Hard Fork is the New York Times tech podcast, which we both really enjoy. The hosts are hilarious. They also do a broad survey of technology developments and frequently a deep dive into generative AI. And then my last recommendation for today is Allie Miller. And I don't know Allie Miller personally. I just started following her recently, but she has an MBA from Wharton, and she was formerly the lead product manager at IBM Watson and then global head of machine learning, startups and venture capital for AWS. And she's now on her own and doing amazing work advising companies, but I follow her on social media. And I'm not a huge social media person, but I actually find social media to be a really nice media for learning about these things because it changes so quickly. So those are some of my current go-tos, and we'll continue adding to this list in future episodes. And so that brings us to the end of our conversation for today. We've covered a lot, though. We'll continue sharing our magical Gen AI moments. Some concepts unique to the technology itself, questions that we're hearing across the profession and our best attempts to answer them, and then the resources that we're finding most helpful in staying educated. Any closing thoughts, Bridget, before we sign off before our next episode?
No, just thanks for listening, and we're going to be eager to return to a lot of these topics. Each one of them we probably could go on for an entire show on, but we want to do our best to move through some more material. So I bet we circle back on a number of these as we continue to learn, which we're doing every day.
Absolutely. And if you find this helpful, be sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts, or you can find us on YouTube as well. And until then, we will see you in the future. Thank you for tuning in to 2030 Vision, AI and the Future of Law. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Stay informed and inspired, as we continue to explore the AI-driven future of the legal profession. We'll see you next time.